good morning, or actually, I should say good afternoon, Patricia. How are you?
Well, thank you. A little bit chilly, but otherwise fine.
Great, great. Nice to talk to you finally. For the people watching, Patricia is the author of the new Modernist House, a book that was recently released, published by Thames and Hudson. We will talk with Patricia about what inspired her to write the book, but of course, first we would like to know a bit about yourself. So, would you like to tell us who you are and where you're coming from? Uh, Go ahead.
Okay. I am not a trained architect of any kind, and I'm actually not really a writer per se in the formal sense. I studied design. I studied glass design, hot glass blowing actually at university a long time ago. And then I started around the turn of our new century, when the internet rose up. I started looking at a lot at houses online. Houses for sale, real estate, which is a big fascination in Australia. And through my burgeoning appreciation of mid century architecture and mid century houses locally, I sort of fused that with the real estate listings and was able to spot them and write about them, purely for my own venting reasons. I was getting pretty passionate about the fact that there were so many beautiful examples of mid century and modernist design being sold and being knocked over, and being redeveloped or really poorly renovated. So I started a blog. That's the very short story about that. I grew up in a mid-century modernist house by a firm called Guagliardo. It was built in 1968. Um, but that was my childhood home, and you don't really realize how much that leaves an impression on you probably until you become an adult and move away from such houses.
I can
Um,
imagine. I'm not that lucky, so I don't know how it feels. But what memories, let's say, brought you to become so attached to mid-century modernist architecture? What drove you towards the aesthetic?
I think because it is a felt aesthetic in a way, it's not so much a visual aesthetic. So the feel of my childhood home, the light, the air, the smell of the timber. We had timber ceilings, a lot of timber in the walls. Those sort of ephemeral feelings really came through and would really, you'd often find that in houses that you perhaps walk in today. Um, they're the sort of really elemental aspects which all come from the design itself and those inherent qualities of the design, the site specific and orientation and building for the environment and so on. So they're the sort of felt feelings that I had. I also came through from a cultural perspective through things like pop culture, back teak furniture, West German ceramics, that sort of collector type culture and cohort. I sort of had quite a bit of that influence as well. So it's sort of the both fusing as well in the appreciation ultimately.
Yeah, well, sounds like a perfect motivation, actually. I can resonate because I visited several mid-century houses, and indeed, the feeling, the coziness that also probably relates to the materials that were used, and also the light, the space, definitely, I can imagine can resonate and trigger something in you. Uh, Most of our readers are from the United States, so they're probably used to a very specific aesthetic when it comes to mid-century modern. But Australia has a slightly different edge, I think. Would you like to maybe explain us what is the main, let's say, characteristic of a mid-century Australian house?
Oh, good question. I feel like with Australia and like any other form of artistic kind of endeavor, there are dialects. So Australia actually has a few different, quite notable types, so to speak, of mid-century modernism. There is the quite grander, more expensive homes that were purely come from the immigrant experience of quite a lot of European immigrants moving to Australia post-war, post and during and perhaps pre-World War II. Beautifully crafted, really elegant, and kind of groundbreaking designs. But then we also had quite a local cohort of architects as well, who really were embracing the Australian flora and fauna and environment and conditions for the very first time. So that gave rise to what's known as the Sydney School, which is quite a rough-hewn, unadorned timbers, a lot of rustic brick, quite what you might think of in a later kind of style, perhaps, so to speak, of mid-century modernism. Heavy and a bit complex inside with split levels and so on. Lots of texture. That is also a classic sort of Australian modernism example in domestic housing anyway. There are a couple of others as well that you might point out, project homes that were built to deal with a massive influx, again, of the baby boom and immigrants post-World War II. So they were a different style of almost, not prefab, but pre-designed homes. America has a bit of a tradition of those as well. That dominated a lot of Australian suburbia and the coastlines as well.
Yeah, I've never been to Australia, but it would be interesting to see the differences between the two, actually. Um, you mentioned earlier that you now live in a mid-century house, right? Or like a modernist house. I saw a few pictures. It looks really nice. I would like to ask you how it is to go back to a house with such a strong image and feeling, how it is to live in one of these houses. And can you tell us maybe how did you end up buying this house and why? What drove, also what attracted you to this house specifically?
Yes, so after 18 years of living in my childhood home and then 18 years again of living in the city of Melbourne in lots of different styles of housing in Melbourne, predominantly sort of Victorian and terrace houses, um, we looked to move out of Melbourne and through the coast, and we spotted this house just again online. Sort of looked at it, thought it may be promising, but didn't really think actually much of it. And then decided to have a bit of a look at it as an afterthought and immediately had to have it. It was just magnificent, beautiful floor to ceiling windows. The kitchen is almost identical to my childhood home kitchen, although it's not the same architect. The architecture of this house greatly admired McGlash and Everest and was a bit of a protege. So used a lot of elements in that sort of style of their work. And so we just had to, it was just one of those things. It was like we had to have the house. And there was actually quite a few people who were interested in the place, but we were very worried that people, this is 10 years ago, were going to paint over the timber, paint the ceiling white, render the walls, those sort of um, renovation type things that people like to still do. So we just made it a bit of a mission to acquire it. And it was being in a relatively sleepy coastal town, it was okay for us to get. So we did get it, and then we lived in it for quite a long time before we ultimately renovated it. We lived in it for a good 7 years or so before we really made any major changes, and that was really only refurbishment anyway, and a pretty sympathetic addition at the back.
Nice, sounds like a nice adventure. And even though your house is not featured in your book, which I want to show again, I we know that there are 21 houses in this book, mid-century and modernist houses. And when I first saw the book, many of the houses look familiar, probably because I saw them in other books or maybe magazines, but many others I never seen before. So I would encourage you, everyone, to really go and check the book, which is now available in the United States as well. There will be the link in the comments. But I want to ask you, what actually inspired you to write this book? Why now? What happened?
Well, I've been running my website and slash Instagram account for quite some time. And I had actually reached a point where I felt like what I was doing in highlighting mid-century houses was being adopted by a number of other people. And in a way, I was happy for that because I felt that if I maybe slowed down and decide to do something else, I have a lot of other creative ambitions, it would be in good hands. So I was thinking that I might slow down. It was in the middle of COVID. We were in the middle of a renovation. We'd had to move because of our lockdown laws that we had here about building being on site with residents. I was homeschooling two children. It was all happening. And then out of the blue, Thames and Hudson invited me to pitch for a book about the renovation of mid-century homes, probably off the back of my audience and my writing on the Instagram and the website. So of course I said yes. And it grew from there. They said, would you be able to find great examples of mid-century homes that have been sympathetically renovated? And I absolutely said yes, I could. And then went the 18 months to 2 years of work, collating it all and writing it all.
And the result, it's really impressive because it's I would say it's one of my favorite books. Now it's like always close to me. Once in a while I go and have a look. It's really nice. It's a pleasure to go through it. And why did you choose these particular houses? Because we said there are 21, but I'm sure there are way more than 21 houses that you, of course, featured on your blog or you knew about. Why these 21 specific houses?
There was some certain criteria. One was that I had to use examples and photography that had already been taken. So
Mm,
these are certainly houses that may have appeared, perhaps some of them in magazine spreads, or the architect firm itself had the work photographed and put on their website, so to speak. Um, One note for any architect listening to this or watching this, please get your work photographed, especially your domestic work, because no one can see it if you do not photograph it.
I agree.
And
I agree.
yeah, it's the best way to see it, and it lives on, and people really can understand your work if you have it out there. Um, so it was a matter of approaching firms and asking, and photographers, which was a big effort, a lot of discussion, getting rights and so forth for photography, and putting it all together. And there were certainly homes and places that I wanted to have in the book that I was not able to have for various reasons. So these are the ones that have sort of ended up settling. I did want to have a little bit more in terms of a more wider spread across the country. We only have one house from Western Australia, for example, and one from South Australia, the two sort of Western states. I would have loved to have had more. Um, and I also would have liked to have had some other forms, more different versions of houses. So we have a couple of townhouses and an apartment. I would have liked perhaps a little bit more of that, but maybe that's for next time.
You mentioned earlier that you're not a book author, you're not trained in architecture, but despite this, you engage in this very challenging project, which lasted almost 2 years, like you said. And I'm curious to know what actually what you learned, what did you learn during this project and during the process?
I learned that the world of publishing is its own entire universe. I did not know anything about the world of publishing and books, and it is an interesting journey going to see all the machinations behind the production of a book, the editing of a book, the writing, and then all the post work, the design and the promotion and numbers and so on. So basically everything about a book, writing and publication, I sort of learned from quite a lucky end of things, really. It's not like I was self-publishing and struggling. I was so lucky to have Thames and Hudson behind it all, taking care of so much of it. So, and they're all really encouraging and really helpful and really supportive. So that was good. So I learned the world of publishing is its own world, and I learned that you can write a book if you just plan your time out well. There was a lot of scheduling and no, non-weekends and mornings off work and so on to get some things done. So if you got to be organised, I think I have to be anyway to get anything
Well,
done.
that these are all very good tips for potential new book authors.
Mhm.
So the result again is the new Modernist House, published by Thames and Hudson, which is now available in the United States as well, and of course in Australia already for quite some time. That's all the time we have available for today. So I want to thank you, Patricia, for your time, for writing this incredible book, which I really like. And I hope there will be the new Modernist Houses number volume 2, maybe. Please stay in touch and
Awesome.
let me know in that case, because I would be happy to talk about it.
You'll be the first to know. Thank you, Marco. Thank you for your
Thank
support.
you. No, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much. So yeah, that's all. And for now, have a good day.
Thank you.